The U.S. is currently in a friendship recession. That's sad, with men being the focus. According to a study from the Survey Center on American Life, the percentage of men with at least 6 close friends fell by half between 1990 and 2021. Reasons for this phenomenon include 52% of American men ages 18 to 29 still living at home with their parents, working longer hours, switching jobs more frequently, and individuals are going into a physical office less than before, according to our next guest, Aubrey Hirsch.
A further study by the Survey Center on American Life noted that men are 79% less likely to receive emotional support, with studies showing a specific link between suicide and loneliness in men and a greater fear of intimacy. Here to speak with us on the subject is writer, illustrator, and author Aubrey Hirsch. Welcome, Aubrey.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so what do you attribute this to? There's been a lot of conversation about COVID and lockdowns and the ways that that's changed our society, but it seems like this phenomenon has predated all of that.
Yeah, there's definitely been a line trending downward for the last 30 years in terms of men's ability to make and maintain close friendships. And you hit on a couple of the reasons in your introduction. You know, people are working longer hours, they're switching jobs more often, and going into the office less. And all of those things make it more challenging to create friendships and also to have time for friendships outside of work. Also, people are living with their parents longer, which offers them emotional support in the form of their parents. So they're less likely to go out and find it with their peers. And also it makes less room and space to have parties, have friends over, have just your own private life, things like that. People are also getting married later. But I also found in my research, I think a lot of this has to do with the way that we socialize boys into men. We teach men that their vulnerabilities are a bad thing, that they should hide or repress their emotions. We don't celebrate their connections. We celebrate their fortitude or, what looks like strength from the outside, instead of focusing on those things that, vulnerability is really the most important thing when you're building connections and building relationships with people. So I think we're also doing men a disservice when we bring them up, and it makes it harder for them to connect when they're older.
But isn't that, I know exactly what you're talking about, but isn't that kind of tendency weakening a little bit over time? It seemed like men of my generation and certainly the next generation feel far more, liberated to openly discuss feelings or emotional connections or all that. Like that really, not just men, women, everyone has gotten more open about talking about their mental well-being, et cetera, seeking therapy, all those things, which I would think might foster greater, on a maybe not great, but greater than previously connections between men. So I'm a little bit surprised that if the trajectory seems to be away from close male friendships.
Yeah, I was surprised too, because that's also sort of my impression, but it's possible some of that is just our own experience, or the people that we prefer to surround ourselves with, don't necessarily have these ideas of traditional masculinity. Oh, yeah. Also, there's also some really interesting thinking out there that men's idea of an ideal woman has shifted really dramatically in the last 30 years. Like, it's no longer everybody's looking for a kind of quiet, compliant, homemaker. People are interested in women in leadership positions. They accept women at colleges and universities, women in power. But the idea of what an ideal man looks like has not really shifted as much in that time. We still look at men as kind of the same way.
I have some thoughts and feelings. Well, speaking of the kind of dating expectations and the effect that our kind of intimate relationship expectations on genders are men and women are affecting this, I'm curious about the effect of online dating, generally speaking, because I definitely have observed people kind of relying on the ease with which you can access kind of short-term partners and relationships online as a substitute for keeping in touch with friends who are often now further away than they used to. People are very mobile for their careers. The friends that you met in college might not end up in the same state as you. You don't end up in the same state as your parents. And there is a way that if you want to be occupied on a weekend, you can hop on an app and be occupied with someone that is ultimately probably going to be a much shorter term presence in your life than a friend. What do you make of that?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I didn't look at any research that talked about the effect of online dating on this phenomenon specifically, but I definitely did look at a fair amount of research that talked about women as tending to do things together kind of face to face, or like, interfacing together, talking to each other, even if it's on the phone or via Zoom. Whereas men tend to do things shoulder to shoulder, sitting together and watching sports together, going on hikes, doing kind of physical things. So, I mean, that would certainly kind of go along with what you're saying about how if someone's not physically there, it's maybe more challenging for men to make those connections.
But a significant way that men interact with each other now in a social manner is video games are a much larger part of the male experience than they have been historically. Video games have gotten really good, really compelling, very narrative, very technologically sophisticated. I play a lot of video games. I don't play a lot of video games that are interactive, that are online with other people, but a lot of guys I know do, and they're collaborative and social and friendly competition usually, not always, but that would be a dynamic I would point to as a friendship building thing. But maybe dudes don't label their video game buddies as like close friends, even though what they have is kind of a close friendship. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly possible. I think, again, that's a great example of that kind of shoulder to shoulder activity that, men are doing together. But it doesn't necessarily lend itself to some of the things that popped up in my research, like talking about a personal problem or offering or receiving emotional support, telling a friend that you love them. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. You would have to tell me, but how much of that's happening during the video game play?
How many of I love you, man.
I love you, pwned. Well, look, it is difficult to maintain relationships, I think, for everyone. And you point to the fact that this is a broader trend that's not exclusive to men. And I think that, there is a kind of an unspoken amount of labor that goes into coordinating times to get together, scheduling times for phone calls, doing all of that, especially as people get older and families and kids come into the mix. And I wonder, what, if anything, people have thought about in terms of trying to improve upon this issue. If we do think it's an issue that's leading to, suicidal ideation and unhappiness more broadly, what's there to be done?
Yeah, well, the sort of secret sauce to making lasting friendships is vulnerability. So it's kind of being able to get in touch with yourself, to question what you've been told is important, to question what values you've been told are important for you to have, and then think about which ones are serving you and which ones aren't. And if there's things that are keeping you from building these friendships because you feel like you need to, be stoic or show emotional fortitude, you can make a choice to get rid of that. You can just remove that ideal from your brain, and instead you can choose to be vulnerable and make connections, reach out to your friends, make it a priority in your life. All of those things are important.
Robbie, do you think that that's what's coming between, to the extent that there's any issue in keeping friends over the years? Do you think it's your lack of vulnerability among men that's the issue?
I mean, I guess my experience is just very different. I mean, I live in a city. I live in a liberal city. I do actually go to most of my friends I'm very close with my coworkers at both of my offices. I'm married, so my wife and I have a lot of couple friends. So I guess I'm just not in the life situation that this increasing pool of young men find themselves in. So you're
saying you have 6 friends. Name them right now. Let's go.
I definitely have 6 friends. Well, I don't know if I can
Call
name
them.
6
Call
friends
them,
I know.
let's see if they pick up.
No, I'm in a group thread of guys who, but I guess we don't. Do we talk about emotionally vulnerable subjects? This is getting very personal. I have a healthy number of friends, but again, I go into the office, I'm in a city, I see people a lot. If you just live at home, if you're not married or in a long-term relationship, if you live with your parents, if you're not going out because of the pandemic, sure, I could see how you find yourself in a situation where you would describe yourself as having few close male friends, which is a bad thing.
Yeah, and I do think, not to gender stereotype, but I have some executive functioning issues where I find it to be very stressful, the administration of getting people together. And, there are studies that show that men tend to do less of that kind of administrative social work, whether it's, housework or making doctor's appointments for kids and things like that. And I do wonder if the bar for men, a threshold for men of engaging in those kind of activities that are required to maintain relationships is so much higher, if that's just the first thing that's going to fall on the wayside when you get overwhelmed, which again I think is very understandable, but might be about kind of the difficulty of getting together and finding time in increasingly packed lives more than kind of the emotional failures of the less fair sex.
Do men have more female? Probably not, right? More female friends, and that's why they have fewer male friends.
Yeah.
I mean, again, in my situation, right? We have a lot of couple friends. A lot of our social activities are mixed gender social activities.
Yeah, the women are doing some planning, sounds like.
Yeah, and men who have female friends were more likely to have received emotional support from a friend in the last week, and also more likely to have had a friend tell them that they love them than men who have only male friends.
Well, look, you've given us a lot to talk about and think about, Aubrey. I'm sure we're going to keep this conversation going after this segment wraps, so we appreciate you spending this time with us today.
I want to see the group chat.
No, you do not. All right, we'll have more rising right after we went to Brianna.
We'll have more rising right after this.